Over on Jaguar Gator 8, a new college football video is out. In this video, we talk about the 1995 Colorado football team, and how head coach Rick Neuheisel led his team through a bizarre practice in preparation for the Cotton Bowl. Click the card in the upper right corner to watch. And join me tonight on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern, where we'll play NFL trivia on a special night for cash prizes. Link to play below. And now, on with our feature presentation. Most of the time, cutting a player who started for you the previous year is not an easy decision. Obviously, there are exceptions to the rule. If the player takes off his equipment and jersey and just leaves in the middle of the game and maybe the craziest exit in the history of the NFL, then yeah, it's pretty easy. But for the most part, it's a tough decision to make, especially if that player was your starting quarterback the previous year. Because you know that once you cut that player and you place him on waivers, that's it. He's gone. He's not coming back. And you'll have to live with that decision one way or another. You don't get a do-over. You don't get to load up another save file if you change your mind and it doesn't work out the way that you thought it would. And you don't get a second chance. That is 99.9% of the time. Because as absolutely ridiculous and as crazy as it sounds, in 1968, that's exactly what happened with the Denver Broncos. The man you've been watching this whole time is quarterback Steve Tensi. To open up the 1968 American Football League season, the Broncos decided to take a calculated gamble by cutting their starting quarterback, and by cutting a man that they thought would be the future of the team under center. And this gamble did not work out, as he was claimed by another team. So the Broncos requested a do-over, saying, "Wait a second, we want takesies backsies." It seems absurd, but it actually happened, and everything about this, from why they did it to the end result, is baffling. This is the story behind the craziest roster cut in the over 60-year history of the Denver Broncos franchise. Before I talk about the incident in question, we need some context to understand just who Steve Tensi is, and why the Broncos even cut him in the first place. Tensi had been with the San Diego Chargers ever since the team drafted him in the 4th round of the 1965 AFL Draft. The bad news for Tensi going to the Chargers was that he wasn't exactly getting a whole lot of playing time, as the Chargers had one of the best quarterbacks in the league in John Hadl. And with Hadl only 2 years older than Tensi, it was obvious that Tensi's growth was going to be stunted by being in San Diego. As a side note, to learn more about the legendary career of John Hadl, click the card in the upper right corner. The good news, however, was that when he did see the field, he played very well. In 1966, he only threw 52 passes, but across those games, threw 5 touchdowns and 1 interception, posting a passer rating of 92.2. Despite starting only 2 games, he actually had the same number of touchdown passes as the leading quarterback of the Miami Dolphins that season. And among players in the AFL to throw at least 50 passes in 1966, Tensi actually had the second highest passer rating, only behind Len Dawson of the Kansas City Chiefs, who had a passer rating of 101.7. You can learn more about Len Dawson and just how good he was by clicking the card in the upper right corner. The Denver Broncos were not a good team in 1966, finishing 4-10, and a big reason why was because they were inept at the quarterback position. The AFL was truly a league of haves and have-nots. You either had a great quarterback that could carry your team and guide you to success, like the Chiefs with Len Dawson, the Raiders with Darryl LaMonica, and the Jets with Joe Namath, or you did not have a quarterback, and you struggled as a result, and there was no in between. In 1966, the Broncos were 4-10, finishing dead last in the AFL West, and finishing with a point differential of minus 185, which was the worst in the entire AFL. They scored just 196 points, averaging 14 points per game, which was the worst total in the AFL. For some perspective on how bad they were, if the Kansas City Chiefs got shut out in each of their first 7 games of the season, the Chiefs would have ended the season with more points than the Broncos. That's how bad they were. The Broncos started 4 quarterbacks, neither of whom were any good, as John McCormick, Max Chobowin, Mickey Slaughter, and Scotty Gladkin combined to throw 12 touchdowns and 30 interceptions. Their combined passer rating as a team was 39.7. If you did nothing but spike the ball into the ground on every single play, your passer rating would be 39.6. In 1966, the Broncos were literally as effective throwing the football as if they didn't throw a pass at all. With new head coach Lou Saban sensing an opportunity, and with Saban needing to upgrade his quarterback position significantly if his team was going to have any chance at competing in an already stacked AFL West, he traded for Steve Tensi of the San Diego Chargers, giving up multiple first-round picks to do so. A steep price to pay for sure, especially since now, there were no more bidding wars between the NFL and AFL for players in the draft, as it was a common draft, so those picks were extremely valuable. But if you think you found your quarterback, then no price is too steep. The bad news for the Broncos was that in 1967, somehow, they were even worse. They went from 4-10 in 1966 to 3-11 in 1967, as they started the season off 1-9 and finished with the worst record in the league. However, the good news, if there was such a thing as a silver lining after having the worst record in the AFL and not having a first-round pick to show for it, was that it seemed like the Broncos may have found their quarterback. Because Steve Tensi, at the very least, made the offense better, and was a noticeable upgrade over whatever the heck the Broncos were trotting out there in 1966. Tensi finished the season with 16 touchdowns, which was the 6th highest total in the league, and he ended the season on a relatively high note, throwing 8 touchdowns over the final 5 games. After failing to throw a touchdown in 4 of his first 6 games, he threw a touchdown in 8 consecutive games to end the season. Now, I don't want to say Tensi was good by any means. He only completed 40.3% of his passes, which was the lowest percentage amongst all qualified quarterbacks in the league, and his passer rating of 54.8 was in the bottom third of the league amongst all qualified quarterbacks. But he definitely showed potential. Saban and the Broncos were committed to Tensi being the team's starting quarterback going forward, especially after his strong ending to the season. However, the Broncos were dealt a huge blow during the 1968 preseason. After a solid start to the preseason, where Saban said he was highly pleased with how Tensi was progressing, everything fell apart during an interleague game against the San Francisco 49ers, where in a 26-6 loss, Tensi broke his collarbone. There's no footage of the play, but Dave Wilcox hit Tensi coming from the blind side, and Tensi got drilled as a result. Tensi was taken to the hospital, where it was revealed that he would be sidelined for 4 to 6 weeks. Just like that, Denver's starting quarterback was gone for a bit of time. Now, the injury was not super long. It happened on Friday, August 23rd, and 4 to 6 weeks means that, in the worst case scenario of 6 weeks, he would be back by October, meaning that he would only miss 3 regular season games. But Denver had a choice to make with how they wanted to handle his roster spot. Do we use a spot on a guy that won't be able to play for the month of September, or do we try and get him on injured reserve? Well, the Broncos chose option 2, choosing to free up a spot on their 40-man roster. However, the only way to do this was by putting Tensi on waivers. If Tensi cleared waivers, then he would revert back to Denver's injured reserve, and no harm would be done. But if Tensi didn't clear waivers, and some team claimed him, in that case, then that team would own Tensi's rights. Now let's think about this logically. You have a starting quarterback in his mid-20s, who entered the previous season on a high note, and by all accounts, was having a great preseason in 1968 prior to the collarbone injury. And yes, the collarbone injury stinks, but he'll be back by the start of October. It's not like this is projected as a career-threatening injury, or an injury that's going to keep him out for the whole season. So do you think that any team would want to claim Steve Tensi based on those facts? Of course they did! And that's where things get incredibly bizarre if they weren't already. In 1968, the Cincinnati Bengals were an expansion team that had yet to play a single game. And on paper, the Bengals did not have a good quarterback. They had 2 options on their team, neither of whom were any good or proven. In one corner, you had John Stofa, who only started 2 games in his career, although in fairness to him, he won both of those starts. And in the other corner, you had Dewey Warren, the Tennessee quarterback who was chosen in the 6th round of the NFL draft. Tensi was a clear-cut upgrade over Stofa and Warren. So what if he can't play the first 3 or 4 games? You're not going to do anything this year as an expansion team anyways. In the long run, there is no importance on 3 games in a lost season if you could potentially net your franchise quarterback in the process. And just in case there was any doubt about whether or not this would be a good and a smart move for the Bengals to make, Tensi was born in Cincinnati and went to high school in Cincinnati, so he was a Cincinnati native through and through. With that, the Bengals decided that they were going to take advantage of the Broncos trying to put him through waivers, and they put in a claim for Tensi, acquiring their franchise quarterback. Lou Saban was absolutely stunned. He never saw this coming. Now, why exactly he never saw this coming, I have no idea, because he just put a good player at the most important position in football on waivers, who was only going to be out for a few weeks. But according to reports, Saban was startled, which is the last thing you want to hear as a fan. You're in a division with the 2 most recent AFL champions in the Oakland Raiders and Kansas City Chiefs, and you're trying to compete with them. And not only did you lose your starting quarterback, but your head coach didn't see it coming, and was completely shocked that someone would claim him. So what did Saban do after he made this incredible mistake that was bound to shake up his roster and his future plans for the team? He requested a do-over. That's right. After being notified that the Bengals put in a waiver claim for the man that they traded 2 first-round picks for and still had every intention of playing once he got healthy, Saban pulled him from waivers and basically said, "We never did that. We're not getting rid of Tensi. What are you talking about? He's ours, not Cincinnati's." Apparently, Saban thought you were allowed to do that, and were just allowed to call takebacks after cutting a player. But do you want to know the craziest part about this whole thing? As strange as the situation was, and as badly as Saban messed up by placing Tensi on waivers, only to have him get immediately claimed by another team, Saban's request for a do-over so that he didn't have to place Tensi on waivers and could just adjust his roster in another manner was granted. Seriously, the Broncos were given takebacks. Now, I don't think there were any hard feelings on the part of Tensi. He knew the Broncos wanted him, and he knew that placing him on waivers wasn't an indictment on him whatsoever, but rather just a shrewd way to try and free up a roster spot while he heals. But a lot of fans, especially in Cincinnati, were confused, and understandably so. You can do that? You can just decide that you take back a roster spot? And it wasn't like you see today, where there are reports that a player gets cut at the end of the preseason, but then the player doesn't get cut after interest is reported around the league, because the team never officially announced anything, so nothing was ever official. This, on the other hand, was 100% official. The Broncos officially put him on waivers, and the Bengals officially put in a claim. And then the Broncos just said, "Never mind," and we're allowed to do that. Absolutely crazy. The good news for the Broncos was that not only was Tensi back, but he came back by the 4th game of the season. The bad news, however, was that he would never develop into that franchise quarterback that the Broncos thought he would become, and the Broncos would not win under his watch. Now, in fairness to Tensi, a lot of this was not his fault. Turns out, that collarbone injury of his was pretty significant, and after he re-aggravated the collarbone in a later game during that 1968 season, he had no strength in his arm anymore, and became a shell of his former self. Tensi even retired after the 1970 season, at the age of 28, because the injury was just killing him that much, as he physically could not play the quarterback position anymore. However, in his 4 seasons with the Broncos, he won a grand total of 10 games as a starter, and never received any accolades of any kind. I'm sure the Broncos had significantly higher expectations for the guy when they traded 2 first-round picks to the Chargers to acquire his services. In other words, in the end, the Bengals may have lost the battle by not being able to acquire Tensi on waivers, but they may have won the war. Although it does lead down a rabbit hole of whether the Bengals would have taken quarterback Greg Cook in the first round of the 1969 draft if they had Tensi on their team, and what would have happened in that regard. Today, it's hard to imagine a scenario like this happening, simply because I don't think Roger Goodell would allow it, and a general manager would be fired on the spot if they even thought about attempting anything like this. If you have a starting quarterback, and said quarterback is only going to miss a few weeks of the season, don't try and put him on waivers, and don't be stunned if he gets claimed by someone else because you were too stupid to apply any foresight whatsoever. Then again, you can always just call takebacks and get a do-over, because the rules were weird and they didn't seem to matter. So who even knows what the lesson is from this? All we know is that in the over 60-year history of the Broncos, from a roster management perspective, it is hard to imagine a screw-up any crazier than this one. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9. To see college football videos, subscribe to JaguarGator8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.